The first time I realized my life could break in public, it happened under the kind of lighting that makes everything look clean and honest. We were in the glass atrium at Holcomb and Sable for the quarterly town hall, the kind with those cheerful internal videos where someone from HR pretends to be excited about ergonomic chairs, and the CEO tells a polished fable about grit he learned on a ski trip. I was 24 and wearing the only suit I owned that fit properly. I had a slide deck about vendor risk reduction on the screen behind me and a clicker sweating in my palm. And I thought the worst thing I was carrying was the low-grade panic of wedding planning, caterers and chairs, and the soft hostility of two families trying to fuse into a polite unit. I used to believe that people didn't ruin you in public unless they were villains. Then a man from compliance walked through the doors like he had been waiting for his cue, whispered to the COO, and everything shifted without changing. The COO's smile held. The CEO checked his phone and then checked it again. I kept talking until the words became a cap falling down a stairwell. The COO stepped forward, thanked me, and then, like he was turning off a faucet, said, "Hold on there, Ben. One moment." They told me in front of everyone. Not the details, not the words I would later read in an email that tried to be surgical and ended up feeling like a blunt instrument, but enough. "We've identified irregular access on a vendor portal tied to your credentials," the compliance guy said, right into the mic, like it was part of the agenda. "We need to place you on immediate administrative leave while we review this." I looked down at the fern by the stage and fixated on a brown edge curling in. It was easier than looking at my team, or the CEO, or the screen now frozen on a slide titled, "Trust is a Control." I tried to make my mouth work. I swallowed and said, "That's not possible." It came out flat, no breath in it. Someone coughed in the second row. A phone camera clicked. The COO put his hand on my shoulder the way people do when they need you to be quiet. He guided me off stage, and in the corner where the light didn't reach, he started speaking in human resources tone. "You'll hand over your badge and laptop," he said. "This is purely procedural." My badge felt heavier than it had ever felt, like it had absorbed all my stupid faith in the clean shine of this place. I walked out with the box they give you when you're supposed to keep your dignity: white walls, glass doors, everybody pretending they don't see you. I kept replaying my access logs in my head, the way I always do when something goes wrong. I don't share passwords. I don't leave my laptop unlocked. I don't click links from unknown senders. I was raised to triple-check locks and back doors, and I do. In the elevator, a junior analyst avoided my eyes like what I had was contagious. The doors opened to the lobby, and there he was, leaning on the marble reception desk like a man auditioning for a cologne ad. Caleb. Caleb has the kind of face that works on people who believe confidence is a personality. Smooth, rested, amused. 26, and allergic to accountability since birth. He was my fiancé's best friend from college, the kind men flock to because he carries chaos like a party trick. He looked at my box, looked at me, and smiled like we were in on the same rehearsal. "Rough day?" he asked. He didn't work in our building. He didn't work anywhere you could point at, not really. He floated in that white space where deals came together and contacts mattered and the money found a way into his pocket if he grinned long enough. I stared at him. "Why are you here?" I said, not a question, not even punctuation, just air hitting words. "Picking up a friend," he said. "Coincidence." He lifted his hands like a man surrendering to a joke. "Hey, Mark said you were presenting. Wanted to say break a leg. Guess someone took it literally." He leaned in close enough that I could see the expensive pores on his nose. "Keep your chin up, counselor," he said softly. "You know how these corporate storms blow over." I didn't answer. I walked past him and pushed out into the late afternoon burn of sun on steel, the heat panicking off the sidewalk, the city like a mouth full of teeth. My phone buzzed. A string of messages started stacking. My manager apologizing, HR scheduling, my mother reminding me about tasting nights for the wedding, my sister Lena texting nothing but a heart because she didn't know yet. Mark called, and I let it go to voicemail. I could hear his voice in my head anyway. Calm, reasonable, the man you'd pick in a fire. We were 6 months from our wedding, and I used to sleep better just because his arm was there when the night went loud. I stood there with my box and the sharp light carving everything into facts, and I realized I was holding the wrong kind of story in my hands. I thought I was the man you couldn't surprise. I thought I knew where the floor was. I was wrong. I didn't go home. I went to the river and sat on a bench that needed paint and read the email on my phone 3 times until my eyes stopped replacing words with guesses. There it was, irregular access, vendor portal, supposed login after midnight 3 times in the last month, file pulls that didn't match my projects, a compliance flag triggered by an external IP that aligned with my account. My stomach tightened in slow, mean increments. The vendor named in the email was Requisite Systems, which I knew better than I wanted to. 2 years earlier, when Caleb had been starving for cash and Charm wasn't paying his rent, he pitched Mark on a short-term consulting solution. It wasn't consulting. It was a shell. Caleb had formed a thin company name that looked like 3 other companies at a glance. In the noise of our vendor management system, it could slip through like a shadow. Someone, not me, but my login if you believe the email, had moved paperwork in the right places so invoices got paid for work with names like Operational Mapping Deliverable that weren't more than recycled slide decks. I'd found the shape of it late at night over ramen with a spreadsheet open, and I had walked the quiet corridors of guilt because I loved Mark and because I believed in forgiveness when a man is stupid once. I had buried it the way you bury something that could shatter more than one life. Internal inquiry, NDA, the kind of meeting where the table is so nice you feel wrong breathing on it. The company took the loss. The vendor was slated for termination, and we all pretended it had been a clerical error. Caleb swore he would never pull Mark into that again. He swore he was trying to be a better man. I swore to myself I could stand between the person I loved and the flood. My phone buzzed with my mother's name again, and this time I picked up because you can't dodge her forever. "Are you bringing the sourdough to dinner?" she said, like worlds weren't moving under my feet. "And bring that lemon oil I like. Your sister is bringing a friend." The bench felt like it tilted. "A friend," I said. "Who?" My mother did that delighted hum she reserves for surprises she thinks will land well. "Caleb," she said. "Mark's friend. Lovely boy. He helped me pick out a bottle of wine last week. Very knowledgeable. He and Lena are getting along so sweetly. She's been glowing all day. Isn't that adorable?" A man on a bike rang his bell behind me. The river pushed its slow shoulder past the pier. I tasted metal. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice inside a boundary. "He's not." I stopped. I couldn't say what I needed to say in a parking lot of Summer Sounds to a mother who had already set a place at the table. I could picture Lena's face lit by a new kind of attention, the only kind that mattered at 16, the kind that made a girl feel like she was older than the walls around her. I brought the sourdough because I couldn't face the argument that would follow if I didn't. The house smelled like garlic and expectation. Mark met me at the door, his eyes skimming my face with that careful look he uses when he's balancing truth against peace. "Let's talk after dinner," he said quietly. "I got your messages. We'll sort it out." He kissed my temple, and the touch felt like a ghost of a promise. "Caleb's here," he added, and something in my chest flicked from live to hazard. On cue, Caleb walked out of the kitchen carrying a bowl like he belonged in every room. He was laughing at something my father said, dressed like he had never learned how to worry. And there was Lena, trailing behind him, hair pulled back high to look older, cheeks flushed with the thrill of being chosen. She saw me and did that little bounce she had done since she was 5. "Ben," she said, "don't freak out, okay? I wanted you to hear from me first." She took Caleb's hand and threaded their fingers together before I could step forward, before I could push air into an argument. "We're dating," she said. "It's new, but it's real." Something in the room went quiet that wasn't sound. My mother blinked as if she was waiting for the correct emotional reaction to arrive. My father's jaw moved, then stopped. Mark's eyes picked a point on the wall and fixed there. Caleb watched me with patient amusement, like I was an animal that might do a trick if he waited long enough. "Lena," I said, and my voice cracked on her name. "He's 10 years older than you." She rolled her eyes the way only teenagers and monarchs can. "So," she said, "he's respectful. He listens to me. He's not like boys at school who think Fortnite is foreplay." She squeezed his hand, as if the pressure could make the room admit it was wrong. "You're jealous," she added, stabbed it like a fact. "You've always had this thing about him because you think he's cooler than you." She didn't know about the box from today. She didn't know about Requisite Systems or the conference room where I swallowed my pride like a pill someone else had pressed into my mouth. Caleb lifted his free hand, palm out, generous. "Easy, guys. We don't want to make dinner weird," he said. "I get it. Protective big brother. Ben's a good man. He's had a long day. He looked at me when he said it. Not at Mark. Not at the table. He looked at me, and there was a flash of something under the charm, the real engine of him. I took a breath, then another. The NDA vibrated in my head like a warning sign. If I told the story of what he had done 2 years ago, it wouldn't just be Caleb in the crosshairs. It would be Mark and my engagement and my parents' careful illusion of their good son with his good life. All of it would go up in the kind of slow smoke you can't argue with once it starts. I had buried that history to protect everyone, including myself. And now it was waking up in my kitchen wearing my sister's attention like jewelry. Dinner was a performance of civility with a tremor in it. My mother asked Caleb about his projects. He said words like incubator and synergy and disrupt. My father asked about sports because he uses sports when he needs to measure a man without getting his hands dirty. Lena laughed at everything Caleb said as if laughter could cast a spell, and if I'm honest, it almost did because she looked so happy. Newly, dangerously happy, the kind that makes a person deaf. Mark and I passed each other bread and glances and a long, unspoken battle plan that never found its first move. I asked Caleb about his day. He grinned. Coincidental, he said. Ran into you in the lobby. Did HR give you a branded mug on the way out? They're wild about swag. Don't worry, man. This stuff evaporates. It's all optics and procedural nonsense. Lena squeezed his arm and said, "See? He's supportive." I put my napkin down because my hands wouldn't stop shaking and let them think it was because of heat. After we cleared the plates, Caleb found me on the back deck where the air smelled like tomatoes and wet soil. The city was a low hum beyond the trees. He leaned on the railing beside me, our shoulders not touching. "Remember what you did for me," he said softly, so the air would carry it just to me. "That little accounting storm. You were smart. You kept quiet. You saved Mark a world of pain. You saved your own job, too." I didn't look at him. I watched a moth slam itself stupidly against the porch light, fall, and try again. He continued, still soft. "Keep saving it. Keep saving all of it. Your sister has a crush. I know where the lines are. You do too. Let's not blow air where there doesn't need to be fire." The word fire made my hands curl. He waited, then added, "Also, rough about your login. Sloppy of you. Might want to change your passwords." He smiled, and in that smile was the map of my humiliation. He knew the vendor named in my emails. He knew my credentials had been used like a foreign tongue to say something I would never say. I turned to him finally, not trusting my voice, letting my eyes hold what my words couldn't without shattering the room behind us. He didn't flinch. He held my gaze the way men do when they believe the world was built for them and they only need to lean on it. "Just breathe," he said. "You're good at that. You always were the calm one." He straightened, patted my shoulder as if I were an old couch that had held up, and went back inside to charm the people I loved most. I stayed on the deck until the noise became far away and the sky pressed down into something like night. When I went back in, Lena was scrolling on her phone, smiling at something Caleb had texted her from 3 feet away. My mother was humming while she wrapped leftovers. My father poured coffee like a truce. Mark caught my eye and gave the smallest shake of his head. Later, I nodded, because what else was there? I kissed my mother's cheek, hugged my sister longer than she liked, told my father I'd call him about a game next week, and let Mark lead me out into the dark. We didn't speak in the car, not until we were in the apartment, not until the door latched and the walls could hold what neither of us wanted to say. He started first. "I should have told you he was coming," he said. "I thought it would be worse if you didn't see it coming." I looked at him, and the tiredness in his face almost broke me. "Did you know about the leave?" I asked. He closed his eyes. "I heard rumors. I didn't think it would go this way. I didn't think they'd do it like that." He opened his eyes and stepped closer. "We will fix it." I wanted to tell him everything I was thinking, about the vendor name in the email, about Caleb in the lobby, about the sick geometry of coincidence. But the NDA squeezed my throat like a vice, and love squeezed the other side, and between them there wasn't much room left for any sound. So I nodded. I put the white box from the office on the kitchen counter like a centerpiece for a life that had just gone sideways. A framed photo slid to the top. Me and Mark at the lake, water on our faces, the future easy as breath. I took it out and propped it against the backsplash because I needed to see something I recognized. Then I went into the bedroom, closed the door, and lay down on the carpet because the bed felt too soft for the truth. I stayed silent there, staring at the baseboard like it had instructions written on it in invisible ink. Outside the window, a siren wailed, climbed, flattened out. I inhaled and exhaled until my breath found a rhythm that felt like a tool. The humiliation was an ache that kept adjusting itself, like a bruise you couldn't stop bumping. I thought of Lena's hand in Caleb's, and I felt something in me settle from outrage into something cooler. You can't argue with a man like him. You don't win by being loud. I learned that once, and then I forgot. He had pulled me onto a stage at work and cut me down just enough to make me stumble, and then he had walked into my parents' house and slipped his arm through my sister's like it was his right. He wanted me angry. He wanted me clumsy. He wanted me to break the rules of engagement he believed he controlled. So I swallowed the words that would have lit the room on fire. I let the humiliation fix me into place. I listened to my own breath and taught it to quiet. When Mark knocked and asked if I wanted water, I said no, because I couldn't hold anything else. When he lay down on the bed above me and the springs made a small sound, I closed my eyes under the patient weight of the carpet and made a decision that tasted like metal and felt like a kind of fasting. I would let them think I was wounded into compliance. I would let Caleb believe he had me pinned. I would keep the buried history sealed one more night. I would not go to war in my parents' kitchen. I would plan. And that night, my first act of war was silence. The last thing I saw before sleep took me the way a tide does wasn't the ceiling or the baseboard. It was Lena's eyes, bright with a confidence she hadn't earned yet. It was the way Caleb had said fire and smiled. It was the word vendor clicking into place with the word portal like a lock I had once trusted, now picked. It was the knowledge that I wasn't trapped. I was just finally awake. My name is Randy. I'm 47 years old, and for 15 of those years I managed client relations for Bremail Bauworks. The day Jessica, our new director, told me I was done, in front of my team, no less, I kept my hands steady on the conference table and my voice even. I just said I hoped the client presentation on Friday went well. She didn't catch it in that moment, but she'd find out soon enough what that really meant. I walked out of that conference room knowing the game had shifted. My people, those I'd trained, supported, and fought for, looked at the table instead of me. No one wanted to meet my eyes. Jessica was 32, fresh from some glossy MBA program, with no actual biotech experience. She'd been brought in 3 months earlier to modernize operations, though what she really did was undermine everything that made our relationships with clients work. Back at my office, I started packing. 15 years of wins, trust, and institutional knowledge, 2 boxes. I didn't even look at her when she hovered in the doorway, trying to start some half apology. The truth was, I'd seen this coming since the day she arrived. Every private meeting she scheduled with my clients, every subtle question about my methods, every buzzword-filled suggestion to upper management that my old-school style was holding us back, it all pointed one way. I'd been keeping notes, detailed ones, every slight, every maneuver, every tell. When I got home, Helen was waiting with coffee. She didn't need to ask if I'd been fired. She could read it in my face. She only asked how bad it was. I told her it could be worse, but the truth was I'd never felt sharper. Jessica thought she'd won. She didn't realize the Hollowgate account, the $30 million deal I'd been nurturing for 8 months, couldn't be closed with a generic slide deck and a big smile. That presentation lived in my head and in one battered blue notebook, now sitting safely on my desk at home. Thursday night, she called 3 times asking for details. I ignored her. Friday morning, she called 7 more. By the time Beth from my old team rang me in a quiet panic to say Hollowgate's people were asking for specifics Jessica didn't have, I was sipping coffee downtown. When Marcus, the CEO, called to beg me to come in, I reminded him I'd been terminated without cause and without notice. I wasn't available. By 11:30, Hollowgate had walked out. Jessica accused me of sabotage. I told her these were simply the consequences of her choices. By the end of the day, Drift Shade Limited, a fast-growing competitor, had offered me an interview. Within a week, I'd accepted a senior director role with a better salary, equity, and a signing bonus big enough to cover my daughter's tuition for 2 years. Over the next month, Drift Shade quietly absorbed more than just me. Tom from the Shanghai team, Beth from compliance, people Jessica had underestimated, joined one by one. We didn't recruit them, we offered opportunity, and they took it. The pharmaceutical consulting division we built from scratch exceeded every projection. Hollowgate came with me, along with 4 other major accounts. When Marcus finally called to apologize, his tone was different. Bremail had lost 4 major clients, laid off 15 people, and seen its stock price fall. He asked me to return as VP of operations, offered to double my current salary. I told him it wasn't about money. It was about trust, and that once broken, it's not something you can buy back. 6 months later, Drift Shade acquired 3 smaller biotech firms, making us the largest independent consulting practice in the Midwest. I was promoted to Senior Vice President of Strategic Development. Bramali's board forced Marcus out after another series of failed plays. Jessica's startup in Denver collapsed within 8 months. The organizational transformation she'd been so proud of became a case study in business schools. How not to strip a company of its institutional knowledge. Helen was right from the start. You can't save everyone. You can only control what you do next. I never sabotaged a thing. I simply stepped aside, let them face the reality they created, and built something better in the meantime. And the most satisfying part? I didn't even have to raise my voice. The week after I realized I'd been the target all along, I stopped reacting to their moves in real time. Every message from HR, every friendly text from Mark relaying Caleb's comments, every subtle push to get me to explain myself, I let it sit. I didn't ignore them. I just didn't let them set the pace anymore. If they wanted something, they would have to wait until it suited me. I went back over every scrap of evidence I'd pulled together, but this time I didn't just look for what they'd done. I looked for what they'd left exposed. Caleb had built his little machine around the assumption that I would try to clear my name inside the system, following procedures, escalating quietly. He was betting that my patience and professionalism would keep me predictable. That was his first mistake. I knew the only way to move without him noticing was to use channels he wouldn't think I'd still have. Years back, before I took my current role, I'd been part of a cross-industry working group on vendor compliance. We'd meet twice a year to swap notes and push for better procurement oversight. It was mostly bureaucracy, but it had given me a direct line to people in places Caleb couldn't touch: auditors, external consultants, and a few senior partners at firms our company was still courting. They weren't friends exactly, but they remembered me as the guy who came with receipts instead of rumors. I reached out to 2 of them using an old personal number, one they'd have saved from before I became so visible in the company. I didn't tell them the whole story. I only asked for a little help cross-referencing some irregular vendor filings for a client. It was vague enough to avoid liability, specific enough to get them curious. By the end of the day, I had a secure upload link from a firm that specialized in forensic procurement reviews. It wasn't my company's system, and it wasn't in Caleb's view. While that door was opening, I played my role at home. I cooked dinner with Mark, listened to his stories from work, nodded when he mentioned seeing Caleb at lunch as if it didn't land in the pit of my stomach. I messaged Lena casually, asking about school, not touching the topic of her relationship. I knew that if I tried to pry her away now, she'd cling harder. Distance was my only shot at keeping her from locking herself inside his influence completely. 3 nights in, I got my first packet back from the review firm. They'd traced Requisite's latest payments through 2 intermediary accounts registered under different shell names, but with identical transaction patterns. Both funneled funds into a holding company set up just 6 weeks ago. The listed director? A consulting entity Caleb had used before, different state, same incorporation agent. On paper, it was clean. In reality, it was exactly the sort of sloppiness you get when someone's rushing to rebuild a structure you already burned once. The trick was, I couldn't just walk this into HR. Caleb had already poisoned that well. If I presented anything through internal channels, it would get dismissed as more fixation from the guy under investigation. I needed this to reach the right eyes without my fingerprints on it until it was too late to stop. That's where the second contact came in, a procurement lead at one of our largest competitors. We'd met years ago at a joint supplier audit, and I knew she was always looking for an edge on contracts. I sent her a message that simply read, "Do you still have an interest in Requisite? Heard they're restructuring in ways you might want to know about." No details, no attachments, just enough bait to make her dig. If she pulled the thread, she'd find the holding company, and if she found the holding company, she'd bring it up in the next industry roundtable. Once it was in that forum, the story wouldn't belong to me anymore. It would belong to every compliance team in our sector. Meanwhile, I prepared my personal leverage. The data export from Requisite wasn't the only thing I had. I'd kept copies of internal policy drafts, showing how language around vendor exceptions had changed right before Caleb's accounts appeared. I had calendar metadata linking leadership sign-offs to dates when those shell payments cleared. None of it screamed fraud on its own, but together it built a chain of intent. That was the part one would keep in my back pocket, not to win in the court of public opinion, but to protect myself if they tried to turn the knife again. Mark noticed I was calmer. He mistook it for acceptance. "I'm glad you're letting this go," he said one evening, leaning against the counter. "It's better not to get stuck in a fight you can't win." I didn't correct him. I just asked how work was, and he talked about a new project his team was excited about. I knew Caleb was on it. I also knew that if my plan worked, he wouldn't be for long. By the end of the week, my first contact had confirmed they were opening a formal review of the holding company. My second had replied with a single sentence: "You were right. They're messy." I could almost see Caleb's face when he realized the scrutiny wasn't coming from me at all, but from competitors and auditors he couldn't accuse of personal vendettas. That Friday night, Lena posted a photo online. Her and Caleb at some rooftop event, her smile wide, his hand on her shoulder. I didn't save it. I didn't need to. Soon, his attention would be consumed by something he couldn't charm his way out of. And when that happened, I'd be ready to step in, not with accusations, but with facts laid out so plainly that even she would see what he really was. I went to bed early that night, the first time in weeks my mind didn't race in circles. The trap wasn't set yet, but the pieces were moving into place. This time, I wasn't going to confront him in the open. He'd never even see me in the fight until it was already over. The first sign that my plan was taking hold came on a Monday morning when Mark mentioned, almost in passing, that Caleb had been quiet at work. He said it like it was an oddity, like Caleb had suddenly decided to take a vow of silence. I didn't respond, but inside I knew it meant he was starting to feel pressure from places he couldn't control. If my contacts were doing what I thought they were, his name would be circling in conversations he wasn't invited to attend. By Wednesday, the pressure was visible. I stopped by the company building under the pretense of dropping off a signed HR document. They still hadn't formally processed my leave, which was another thread I was letting dangle. As I passed the lobby, I caught sight of Caleb in a corner with the COO. It wasn't their usual casual, backslapping exchange. This was tight body language, controlled voices, Caleb gesturing in that small, defensive way people do when they're trying not to look defensive at all. The COO's face was expressionless. I didn't linger. I didn't need him to see me. Just knowing that conversation was happening was enough. That same afternoon, one of my industry contacts forwarded me an agenda for an upcoming supplier oversight meeting. There, buried among routine items, was a new entry, review of shell entity structures in vendor onboarding. Case example. No vendor names, no specifics, but I didn't need them. This was exactly the sort of formal, public discussion that would ripple out into every procurement department in the region. Once that conversation started, Caleb couldn't stop it without revealing why he cared. But the confrontation I'd been preparing for wasn't going to be at a conference table. It came sooner, and in a much more personal way. Thursday evening, Mark told me Caleb had invited us both to a small dinner at his place. "He says he wants to clear the air," Mark said, carefully avoiding my eyes. I could hear the guilt in his voice. He knew I wouldn't want to go, but he also knew he'd already agreed on our behalf. I told him fine, we'd go. I wanted to see Caleb on his own ground, without the buffers of the office or my family. I wanted to watch him when he thought he had the upper hand. His place was exactly what I expected, curated to feel effortless, expensive without showing labels, every object positioned like it was waiting for a photograph. He greeted us warmly, too warmly, pulling me into a handshake that lasted just long enough to signal he was in charge. During dinner, he kept the conversation light, even charming. He asked about my time off, like it was a vacation, threw in a few jokes about the industry, and made a point of telling Mark how valuable he was to the new project. It was all performance, but it was the small slip that told me the truth. Halfway through, he leaned in slightly and said quietly enough that Mark wouldn't hear, "You're wasting your time. They don't care what you find. And if you push too hard, you'll only hurt people you claim you're protecting." His smile didn't change, but his eyes were fixed on me. I didn't react. I just kept eating, let him think his warning had landed. But inside, I felt something click into place. That was fear, wrapped in arrogance. If he truly believed nothing could touch him, he wouldn't be bothering to warn me at all. When we left, Mark asked if I thought it went well. I told him it was fine. What I didn't tell him was that Caleb had just confirmed I was getting closer than he could afford. The next day, my contact at the review firm sent me a short update. Holding company flagged for irregularities. Expect inquiries to principals within 2 weeks. That was the moment I knew the tide was turning. Once regulators started knocking on doors, it wouldn't matter how well-connected Caleb was inside my company. His whole structure depended on staying in the shadows, and I had just forced him into the light. Still, there was one piece left to put in place, the part that would keep him from spinning the story back onto me when the fallout hit. I needed undeniable, internal confirmation that leadership had approved his vendor exceptions after my departure. If I could prove they were still signing off on him while I was gone, it would shred the narrative that I was the root of the problem. That meant one final risk. I had to get my hands on those approval logs without leaving a trace that pointed back to me. And I already knew exactly how I was going to do it. The access point I needed wasn't in the company's high-security core systems. It was in the vendor review archive, an internal platform most people ignored unless they were doing quarterly audits. Years ago, I'd trained a junior analyst named Priya on how to navigate that mess of folders and mismatched file names. She wasn't just competent. She was precise, the sort of person who noticed when a file's metadata didn't match its stated creation date. After I was put on leave, she'd sent me one polite message wishing me well and never followed up, which I respected. It told me she was smart enough to know she didn't want her name in my orbit until she understood the shape of what was happening. I called her from a prepaid number, the kind you can pick up in cash without leaving a record. I told her I had reason to believe approvals were being pushed through under the wrong protocols, and that if she happened to see anything strange in her upcoming quarterly prep, it would be in her interest to make a personal copy before it was corrected. I didn't ask her to send me anything directly. I didn't need to. Priya's silence on the line told me she was thinking 3 steps ahead, and when she finally said, "Understood," I knew she'd act. 3 days later, an unmarked envelope was slid under my apartment door. Inside was a plain USB stick, no note. I plugged it into an offline laptop I kept for personal backups. The files were exactly what I'd hoped for, vendor exception logs signed off by the COO and compliance head, dated after my administrative leave began. Each one authorized payment to shell entities tied to the holding company Caleb had been routing money through. My name didn't appear anywhere in the chain. The approvals were fully theirs. I stared at the screen for a long time. This wasn't just a crack in their version of events. It was a clean break. If this surfaced alongside the external investigation already unfolding, it would remove any plausible way to pin the operation on me. More importantly, it would force leadership to choose between cutting Caleb loose or going down with him. That weekend, Lena stopped by my place without warning. She said she was just in the area, but the way she lingered by the counter told me she wanted to talk. Eventually, she admitted Caleb had been stressed lately, canceling plans, spending more time handling things at work. She said it like she didn't quite believe his explanations anymore. I didn't push. I just listened, nodded, and told her I hoped she was looking out for herself. When she left, she hugged me longer than usual. It wasn't trust yet, but it was a shift. Monday morning, I sent an anonymous package to my first industry contact, the one who had initiated the formal review of the holding company. Inside were the approval logs and a short printed note. These transactions occurred after internal access was revoked for the original alleged party. Please verify chain of approval. No names, no accusations, just documentation that would speak for itself. By Wednesday, the ripple hit. Mark came home looking unsettled. He said the COO had been pulled into back-to-back calls with external auditors. Caleb had been asked to take some personal time, effective immediately. The project he'd been leading was suddenly reassigned. No explanations were given, but the undercurrent was obvious. Something had broken open, and it wasn't small. 2 days later, a brief statement appeared in an industry compliance bulletin. Just a few lines about an ongoing multi-vendor review triggered by irregular onboarding patterns. No companies were named, but I recognized the language. This was the public doorway to what would become months of scrutiny. And Caleb's name, I was certain, would be dragged through it before long. That night, Mark asked me outright if I'd had anything to do with it. I looked at him and said, "I didn't start it. I just made sure the right people had the right information." He didn't press further. Maybe he didn't want to know the details. Maybe he already knew enough. The next morning, I received a text from an unknown number. You've made your point. Walk away. No signature, but I didn't need one. Caleb's confidence had finally cracked into something else, fear disguised as control. I closed the message without replying. Walking away wasn't the plan. Not yet. I wasn't finished until the damage he'd caused to my name, to my career, and to Lena's trust in me was fully repaired. And that, I knew, would require one last move.